Well, welcome everybody. Good to see everyone here tonight. We are going to be covering Esther chapter 3 tonight. Before we get into that, let's do a quick recap of chapter 2. Somebody want to tell us what that chapter was about or what happened there? Hit the highlights. Anyone? I can do it. Chapter 2, John's class on Sunday. And also, I've been asked that if you do have comments or questions, raise your hand and somebody with a mic will come to you. Apparently, we're kind of having trouble hearing it otherwise on this live stream. So, chapter 2. Who's this chapter about? Who are we introduced to here? Mordecai. Yeah? Mordecai and who? Who else? Not yet. Chapter 2. That's right. The titular character, Esther. This is where we see her. And who are Mordecai and Esther? What's their relationship? Cousins. Raise your hand, Robert. That's right. Esther's father was Mordecai's uncle. They are the great-grandchildren of Kish, who was one of the captives that was taken from Judah during the Babylonian siege. So they now find themselves there in Susa, and we get this story now about this empire-wide competition to replace Queen Vashti. So she gets taken. What happens when she gets taken into the king's custody? First thing. Right. That's right. They immediately go into this preparation phase for their night with the king, right? And she actually wins favor with the eunuch that's in charge of the house of virgins. His name is Haggai, and he gives her a little bit of preferential treatment, doesn't he? He gives her own place there in that house, and kind of gives her some advice. How long do those preparations last for their night with the king? They had 1 year, kind of the process for purification in case there was any kind of disease, and beautification just to prepare for that night. So a year goes by. It's time for Esther to go into the king. What does she bring with her on her night with him? Right, nothing but what Haggai instructs her to, right? You got to think in a kind of this winner-take-all competition that they're having. The contestants are basically going all out here, aren't they? They're dressing in the best clothes they can get, going over the top with jewelry and all that sorts of things. And Esther, on the other hand, decides to keep it simple, goes with kind of the less is more strategy, and it works, doesn't it? Ahasuerus prefers her to pretty much all the others, though I believe they do have a second round of this competition. We read a little further after. So she's kind of made queen, but then, I guess some late contestants show up. I don't know, but there's a kind of another round. But she continues to be the queen, and then they throw a feast for her in her name, and there you go. What are some things that stick out to you about this first part of chapter 2, this whole beauty contest? Yeah, Albert.
I just recall in verse 20 when it talks about Esther had not made known her kindred as Mordecai commanded, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So I feel like there's an age difference, but also I see a character trait of Esther in listening to wisdom, either out of fear or out of wisdom, I guess. But I get insight into her character with that verse.
For sure. Yeah, that's going to be kind of crucial, both those points, to the rest of the story here as we move forward. Anything else? Anyone? Yeah, Brian.
The only I can think the only thing I can think of is the providence of God. I believe this to be canonized, that this is the word of God.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, Haman was going to eradicate the Jews, destroy them, which of course would have destroyed, I mean, he preceded Hitler by a couple thousand years. But and of course, if he'd been successful, there would be no Messiah rising out of Judah.
Right.
So you see a series of what we might call coincidences,
Yeah.
Her being there, Mordecai being there, him telling her to be quiet,
Yeah.
Mordecai overhearing the folks, the two men plotting against the king, et cetera, there's a series of coincidences here that's like a Tom Clancy novel.
Yeah. And that, I think, is going to be the primary theme of this book, this whole book. One thing that kind of stuck out to me was just the darkness of all this. This is not like just some beauty pageant, and then the losers just end up going home and getting on with their lives, right? It's you're either going to win and be queen, or you're going to this house of the concubines, and there you're going to live, and basically you exist to serve the king's pleasure. That's your life. Not really the kind of VeggieTales version of the story that you hear growing up, but kind of a dark story here. What happens at the end of the chapter here? That's right. Mordecai, he overhears something, a plot against the king. He tells Esther. She tells the king. Conspirators get the axe. Well, I don't know if they got the axe literally, but they're executed. And as Albert mentioned, what's I think really notable about that is, despite her being queen, she's still being obedient to Mordecai. She's still honoring him as the one that raised her, and she does not disclose that she is a Jew. That's going to be really important going forward. Any more comments on chapter 2 before we move on? Yeah, Robert.
Just real quick, the verse 23 where it says, "And it was written in the book of the Chronicles." I mean, it's like that was recorded for us so that when we get to chapter 7, when the king wants to be, or chapter 6, when the king wants to honor Mordecai,
Right.
it's like, well, how did he know? Well, it was told.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's tying out the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah, we're gonna kind of circle back to this event here. It's a pretty important event in the story as we go forward. So, all right, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 3. I'm going to go ahead and read the first 6 verses. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Oh, okay. So here we go. We've got Haman coming into the story. Mordecai being insubordinate here. Now, Ahasuerus, as we've established, is clearly not a great guy. We've seen it in the first couple of chapters, some of his impetuousness, some of his bad decision-making. We've seen it in some of the historical accounts that we talked about. But he's really not the main villain of this story, is he? It's Haman. Haman in Hebrew means violent one or riotous one. That's what it translates to. So that Haman may not have actually been his name, but more of what the Jews ended up calling him. It does also translate in Persian. Some people do believe it's a Persian name, and it translates as well-disposed. We're going to see, we'll talk about him here, but that may be an apt nickname for him as well. We'll get into that here in a second. It says his father was Hamadatha the Agagite. We see that name Agag previously in the Bible, don't we? Y'all know where? Well, it's back in the time of Saul, right? This is where Saul lost the kingdom. He's instructed to wipe out the Amalekites, if y'all recall, and their king was Agag. And a lot of people believe that Haman is some descendant of Agag somehow. In fact, we talked about a lot of those Jewish traditions. John called it like fan fiction that kind of arises around this story of Esther that supposedly fill in some of the gaps, some of the backstories and stuff. They really believe that Haman was a descendant of him. However, in 1 Samuel 15:33, we see where Samuel hacks Agag to pieces, and you read that whole account. It does make it seem like Agag is like the last of the Amalekites, like there's nobody left. And if Samuel chops him to pieces, then it would be kind of hard for Haman to be a descendant of that guy. So stuff like that kind of throws a lot of those Jewish traditions and stories kind of into question a bit. They're not really that reliable. So we try to kind of give you some like what ifs here, like this might be what happened, but you can't fully count on those to be perfectly accurate. Agag was in fact another territory that was adjacent to Media. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. In fact, the Septuagint, when you start looking at that, it was the Old Testament written in Greek about 300 BC. We all know that. They call Hamadatha, Haman's father, the Bugain, which is after the Bug River. Does anybody want to guess where that is? It's north of the Black Sea, and it's in a country that's in the news a lot right now. Ukraine, which the Persian Empire, it was part of the Persian Empire at this time. The Bug River flows in the Black Sea, so he was kind of from up there, north of the Black Sea in Ukraine. And he gets promoted to second in command over the entire Persian Empire. He's ahead of all of the princes of Persia. We remember the 7 princes of Persia. Despite all this, the emperor commands all to bow down before him and give him respect. What does that suggest about Haman here? Oh, he certainly does, yes. Anything else? He was ruthless? Do y'all think he was part of the nobility? Or was he a commoner? You think he was part of the nobility? So, from what I've read, a lot of the scholars believe he was a commoner, actually. If the king had to command that this guy had to be respected, and he wasn't before, I mean, a nobleman would probably already have, he would probably already draw respect from people. It wouldn't be like that, you don't respect this guy, you're violating the king's commands. So yeah, a lot of scholars tend to believe that he was a commoner who has somehow climbed the ranks, whether he was politically savvy or if he stabbed backs. He got up to being the number 2 guy. Why did Mordecai refuse to bow down? It says what? It says he was a Jew, right? But why would that have anything to do with it? Okay, so if the king went by Would he bow down to the king? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you'd probably bow down to the king if he went by. Otherwise, I mean, that's probably instant death right there if you don't. Any ideas? No? Well, I have a couple of potential things that reasons why he might not have bowed down. Again, you got to be careful about listening to the Jewish traditions and stories, but they seem to suggest that he wore images of idols and things like that on his clothing as he did his duties in the empire. Bowing down would be basically a form of idolatry. So that's one potential reason. What do we know about Ahasuerus? What did he think of himself as? He did think of himself as a god. Haman, being the second in command, may now be trying to latch on to that and assert some level of divinity himself. And of course, a Jew could not worship a man as God. We know that would definitely violate the law. We don't know for certain. It seems like one of those is probably the most likely explanation. Yeah, Brian.
At least another possibility in my mind is whether or not by law the people were to bow down to Haman. You know, you bow down to the king, but it sounds like to me, at least from the text, that Haman took this honor upon himself and imposed it upon the people without the passage of a law or decree of the king.
It does say, I think in verse 2, that and all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. So we do have basically a law that the king had made that command. So, did somebody have some? Yeah, Ian.
I think, maybe thinking in regards to, I guess, what we think we know about Haman and how he came to be in this position, it probably wasn't because of the noblest of efforts. And Mordecai, I would assume, could see through this, and he probably was thinking in the back of his head, I'm not going to bow to you. You're not a nobleman. You didn't receive this title, probably didn't receive this title because of your good deeds. Right. You know, that you have political aspirations and like egotistical and selfish motivation. And it's probably sounds feasible to me that that's like something I would do. Like, you got here by stabbing people in the back. I'm not going to honor that.
That's a great point. That's a possibility too. Yeah, Jordan.
It does seem to be a difference, though, than obviously what we saw. Sorry. It does seem to be a difference, though, than what we saw with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel and whatnot.
Right.
So it's a little, and maybe that's intentional. The text doesn't tell us why that was a problem specifically, and so you would think that, okay, well, if Mordecai hadn't done this, would we have this conflict in the book of Esther? But again, going back to the canonicity of it, shows the providence of God that even in this situation that may have been avoidable, possibly, from Mordecai's perspective, or from our perspective, I should say, that still things were at work in a city far, far away from ancient Israel to preserve God's people. So maybe it's not clear intentionally.
Possible too. Yes.
Thank you. Find it an interesting study on Haman to compare the ego and the power of the number 2 man that he was and how he reacted to it compared to Moses in Egypt.
Okay.
They were both very high, and yet Moses acted totally different than Haman on this power grab type situation that he did. So that really shows that men that gain power like that, especially men that are not part of if he was a commoner, men that are not part of that dynasty or whatever you want to call it, can either work it or they can let it go to their heads and just consume them. And I think it's an interesting parallel, or not parallel, but
Contrast, maybe,
comparison,
yeah.
contrast between he and Moses and how the number 2 man reacted to the power that he was given, even though he wasn't part of that royalty.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought there. I hadn't considered that myself. Yeah, we definitely see the negative effects of ego and pride in Haman, that's for sure. Do we get any indications about Mordecai's character? Like he says he's not going to do this because he's a Jew, but yeah, go on.
I mean, if you take a very serious Jew, put them in chapter 2, they're not going to go down and give their cousin to a non-Jewish person for marriage without a fight, probably. Can you take that context and apply it to what's going on here? Maybe, maybe not, but it could just be Mordecai had his own ego. Like there doesn't have to be particularly religious reason for this. This could just be his own politics coming out.
The other thing, too, John's point, in verse 4, maybe I'm confused too. When he says that he had told them that he was a Jew, the way I read that, it could be completely incorrect. I don't know if he's saying, hey, that's why I can't bow down because I'm a Jew. I think that may be an ancillary point that he was a Jew, and that was just a factual piece of the story and not the reason why he didn't bow down, possibly.
Interesting. Yeah, I had kind of thought about that too. Maybe, he had made some kind of vow or something that he wasn't going to bow down and he wasn't going to break it because he was a Jew. It can be read a couple of different ways. That I saw a hand go up. Yeah.
Based on what I'm getting from chapter 2, even when Esther was made queen, we didn't see Mordecai going, yes, we're in, and he could relax. He still is very cautious, and so I get that from the context, and then I get in here that, he knew it was a king's decree, so the question about would he bow to the king or not bow to the king, he broke this rule, so could we logically say he would break that rule as well? And it seems like I'm getting I'm comfortable going down the rabbit hole that there's factions, there's tension, and the Jews are on the short end of that with other factions out there. And as, again, I don't want to go later on into the other chapters, but you just see a disgust and despise of, and willing to wipe out the
Right.
Jews. So
It's kind of interesting, the contrast there. Like, he's very cautious. He like you said, he warns Esther not to reveal that she's a Jew. Like, don't come out. Don't take advantage of this for our people. And yet, he's willing to kind of stand up and kind of take this stand and not bow down to Haman. So it kind of seems like almost two things at odds there. Cautious, reserved in one hand, and then kind of bold on the other hand. Did somebody say? Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Anyway, the other officials dime Mordecai out to Haman, and he loses it. The Hebrew word here used is chima. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but it means to be on fire or burn with anger. It's the exact same word that we see in Daniel 3, describing Nebuchadnezzar when the Jews don't bow down to his image. What does Haman do about this? Well, he decides to do what anybody else in his shoes would do, right? Commit genocide because a guy insults you, right? Yeah. So he's kind of a lunatic, pretty clear. He doesn't have good impulse control. What other negative character traits do we see right away in this guy? We've already talked about a couple of them here. The big one. Or if it's straight up evil. Ego, pride, as we just mentioned. That's the big one. That's going to be the one that drives his actions throughout the rest of the book. I think his biggest failing. To me, like we've just we covered this just a second ago, but this is a great example. Haman is a great example of pride taken to the extreme, how it consumes us, how if we let it, and the consequences of that. We're going to see pretty awful. But yeah, I think we talked. Providence for sure is, I think, the major theme here, but I think pride and its consequences are another major theme of this whole book, if we're looking at the villain side of things. So, any comments on that? Any other thoughts, questions? Ian?
Thanks, Michael. I just think it's interesting that after what's happened in the last 2 chapters, we still see the king. He's now surrounding himself with more people that are justifying him doing the crazy, outlandish, evil things he's done. I mean, Haman is doing what the king has done previously, basically. He's just putting another guy surrounding him that's okay with the king doing whatever he wants to do.
Another
Killing
yes
people.
man, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Par for the course for Ahasuerus, really. Bad decisions, bad advisors, no, self-control. Just not the best guy, the guy you really want with those qualities to be king, for sure. So, okay. Well, we're going to move on. We're going to get into the next few verses. Let's go ahead and read, starting in verse 7, and we're going to go through 11 here. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, they cast lots, before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month, till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that it may be put into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." Well, that didn't take long, did it? It didn't seem like he had to convince him very much. So the first month of the Jewish calendar, Nisan, I don't know I'm terrible with pronunciation, so it corresponds to a March, April kind of time frame. The 12th year of Xerxes, we're now in the year 474, so Esther has actually been queen for a few years now. Some time has passed. And here we see Haman having lots or pur cast. The word pur in Hebrew, they say, is probably a borrowed word from the Assyrian word peru, which means stone. So he's probably having lots cast with stones with numbers or images or something on them. Casting lots, as we know, is pretty common practice in most of these ancient East civilizations, even into the Roman times. But sometimes it was dice or sticks, but in this case, it looks like it was stones. And why is he having lots cast? Yeah, Brian?
I don't know why it is. You see the providence of God.
Yes.
You see the providence of God that He gave the Jews a year to prepare in advance for this slaughter. And secondly, this is in the context of when the king signed the edict. It was law that can't be reversed, not even upon the pleadings of the queen, which later comes, and we'll see how that plays out in coming chapters. But Haman deferred his plans for a full year.
Yeah. He's determining the day and the month in which to enact this plan that he has, and then it falls about a year later. There can be some confusion when it says like he was casting lots day after day, month after month. It doesn't mean like every day he would cast a lot. Well, not today. It was, he would, March 1st, no. March 2nd, no. He went through each day of the year basically until the numbers or the symbols were right, and then it fell on that certain day. It said the 13th day of the 12th month, Adar, and that corresponds to February, March time frame, so about a year out. Why even do this at all? Why not just other than the providence of God, but what would be a reason for not just enacting the plan immediately and, getting on with it? Yeah, Albert.
Grammatical question, and I don't mean I'm asking for anybody. Who is the they in verse 7? They cast her before Haman. I don't know how to follow that back grammatically.
I'm assuming it's some of his assistants, his helpers. He's a second in command. He's got he's got a crew that works for him, I'm sure. Yeah.
Typically, they cast lots to get some sort of intervention from some supernatural or spiritual
Yes.
reason. So maybe that speaks to just how maybe cold and calculated this guy was to enact this plan. He's willing to wait this full year and wait till he had the blessing of this higher power before he put it in place.
Yes, I think that's what we see. These are pagans. They're idolaters. They believe in gods, and this is his way of kind of giving an air of legitimacy to this whole thing. The gods say we should do it on this day, and he can more easily maybe get people on board with it. So I think, Jordan, you're absolutely right. So they pick out the day, and he goes to the king and immediately starts bad-mouthing the Jews, right? He's saying they don't keep the king's laws, making him out to be this threat to the empire. All lies, obviously. Do y'all remember what Jeremiah had told the Jews, when they were about to go into captivity? It's going to be in Jeremiah chapter 29. It's basically, he commands them to seek the welfare of the city that they're in and pray to God on its behalf. They were to be obedient to the empire that they were under control of. So now there were some rebellions. I think there was a Jewish rebellion at some point. Was that during the Babylonian captivity, or was it under the Persian? I can't remember. I figured y'all know with having taught that class. It's right on the tip of your tongue. But yes, for the most part, the Jews were peaceful. There aren't really any records of any kind of major uprising involving them. They've been good citizens up to this point. Ahasuerus doesn't bother to check any of this. Obviously, he just gives Haman the signet ring and says, do what you want, basically. In verse 8? Let me read here. And they do not keep the king's laws, plural. I guess that's a bit open for interpretation there. Like, what laws is he talking about? The law to bow down to Haman? I guess technically, yeah, they didn't. At least one didn't. But laws plural, I would assume, like if they were truly the troublemakers that he had made them out to be, they'd have been dealt with. Ahasuerus didn't seem to be one to suffer, any kind of, yeah.
I'm just wondering if verse 8 doesn't shed some light on verse 4.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of along what Albert was saying there probably is a certain amount of truth to the Jews didn't keep the rules, because to a certain degree, because if you go back up to verse 4, it says that they told Haman what Mordecai had said, that he was a Jew, and they told him that to see if Mordecai's words would stand. So evidently there's some, do they really have to, or do they really not? And because of that wiggle room, I think Haman wants to take them all out, because if there's any issue that they don't have to bow down, he's going to take care of it once and for all.
Mm-hmm.
Just
The possibility, yeah. Whether he was truly concerned about the entire Jewish population or if this is just some petty plan to, destroy Mordecai and make him pay for this slight, I don't really know. It could be read either way, I suppose. Brian?
I do know from a bit of history is that when these nations conquered other nations, they allowed self-rule of the conquered nation and allowed them to do their things according to their own governance as long as they paid. They were vassal states, and they were good as long as they paid their their honorariums or their taxes back to the king, even up through the Roman period.
Yeah.
Romans allowed the Jews self-governance up until the point of installing a governor in displacement of the king. That's well, I'll get back in Genesis 49:10 on that. But the point is, it sounds like to me the Jews have been granted their homeland again, their self-governance. So the only law I can say being broken here is Mordecai's refusal to bow down to Haman.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. If y'all recall in the first class when we talked about the Persian culture and kingdom, they allowed the people that they conquered to basically carry on with life as usual, so long as you paid your taxes and you honored the king. You didn't cause a ruckus, didn't rebel. You could keep your own religion and do what you want. So, okay. How many Jews do we think that Haman is planning to kill here? He wants to wipe them all out. How many exist at this point in time? Any idea? Well, the estimates range from anywhere from 2 to 3 million people spread across the whole empire. Y'all recall that the empire goes from India up through Russia to Turkey, down to Ethiopia, and almost everything in between. So. We're talking about a whole lot of people that have been scattered across the entire empire. And not only is he willing to kill all these people, but he's willing to pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury as well. Doing some of the calculations, and of course, with today's inflation, I don't have the exact number. When I calculated it last time, it equated to about $300 to $400 million. So. Haman seems to have some money somehow. But yeah, that's a lot of money. And I'm sure he probably figured that he would recoup some of that when he killed and plundered the Jews. But that just shows the absolute rage that somebody would be willing to throw away a fortune like that over this petty slight. Pretty... This is crazy. That's just crazy. Herodotus estimates that this sum was probably equal to the annual tax revenue of the entire Persian Empire at the time for 1 year. If you're thinking about it in weight, that's about 750,000 pounds of silver. A lot. And we see that Xerxes has no problem just immediately saying, sure, I'll take your money, you go do what you want. Doesn't check, doesn't care. I guess that the dollar signs were flashing and he went for it. He had that disaster in Greece not too long ago, so there were probably bills that had to be paid. And 10,000 talents would probably get you a good ways of the way there. So, yeah.
Were you saying 10,000 per head, or
No,
a one-time
no,
deposit of
$10,000.
$10,000
$10,000
into the king's treasury?
10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury total. Yeah, yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and move on. We'll finish out the chapter. Let's read 12 through 15 here. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. Yeah, pretty cold. So what's going to happen? There's no going back now, right? Once the decree is sent, you can't pull that back. So the scribes come in, write it all down, send it out to across the empire. I had mentioned this earlier, but the Persians had actually a pretty impressive postal system. They had way stations, like these stations, every 14 miles along the roads, and it was kind of like the Pony Express from back in the day. A rider would jump on one horse, ride as fast as he could, 14 miles, hop onto the next horse, and they could move through the entire empire in about a week's time. So it didn't take them long at all. So this decree is getting out there. There's not going to be like something that shows up months later. The whole world basically knows what's going to go down here. By the time they get it all written out and sent out to everyone, it looks like the Jews have about 10 months or so before this massacre is gonna take place. So, and then it throws the whole city into confusion. And what do Xerxes and Haman do? They sit down to drink and celebrate. So. Xerxes is getting lots of money, and Haman is getting his revenge, or at least so he thinks. So, and that brings us to the end of this chapter. That's what it appears to be. Yeah, it appears to be coming from Haman, and we don't know how he got it. He was a wealthy man. May be why he has climbed to second in command of the empire, because he did have that money. And money brings influence. So, do we have any major takeaways from this chapter? We're about out of time here, but any major lessons to be learned here? There are, but what do y'all say? Right.
Well, it confirms that the intention was to completely destroy the entire Jewish population, to eradicate the Jews. So it was the grand solution that Hitler had in mind,
Right.
as well. So Hitler was repeating history.
Yeah, it had already been tried, hadn't it? Yeah, the magnitude of this, it's a big deal. This is not like a group of Jews in this one city are in danger. It's all of them everywhere.
You see Ahasuerus being flippant again in several ways. I mean, I think we'll continue to see him want to know the race of Esther. And I mean, what did Mordecai do every day for a year? Go to the window and ask about Esther. If anyone had stopped and tried to find, I mean, this guy, Haggai, that was the eunuch, probably knew Esther's relation. Like, if anyone had asked, tried, thought, this might be a known fact. And anyway, you just see more of chapter 1 coming out of Ahasuerus as he doesn't think through. He just hears the money maybe, and just ego lets him.
First thought that pops into his mind, he says, all right, we're doing it.
Feels good.
Yeah. Anyone else? A few simple ones. Power can corrupt, can't it? You climb to this high position and you think you can pretty much do what you want at that point. Well, there we go. That's second bell, wasn't it? Okay. And some people will compromise even the most fundamental standards of humanity for money. If the number's big enough, sure, we'll kill as many people as we need to. So, yeah. So, any final comments? Anything anybody wants to say before we wrap up? Okay. Well, we'll be moving on to chapter 4. John will have that on Sunday. Thank you for all your comments.